My husband beat me for the first time when I was 50 years old. Then he threw me out of our house in the dead of winter, barefoot, because he believed my brother's lies more than he believed the woman he'd shared a bed with for nearly 3 decades. That moment, the freezing concrete under my feet, the sting of blood on my lip, is burned into me so deeply that even now, years later, I can still feel it like a bruise. Before I begin, tell me in the comments where in the world you're watching from and what time it is for you right now. And if stories like this stay with you, please like and subscribe. It really helps me continue sharing the truths I've carried for years. My name is Rachel. I'm from a small town near Columbus, Ohio, and the story I'm about to share didn't begin with violence. It began quietly, almost politely, like most tragedies do. You don't see the cracks at first. You just feel a strange draft in the room and wonder why it's suddenly cold. The irony is that in the months before everything collapsed, I actually thought my life had stabilized. I turned 50 in October. Mark, my husband, had just turned 52. We weren't glamorous, we weren't perfect, but we were steady, or so I believed. We lived in a modest one-story house with a wide porch and the same beige siding we'd always promised to repaint next summer. Inside, it smelled like my routines: coffee in the morning, lavender at night, lemon cleaner on Saturdays. The kind of home you walk into and know someone cares about it, even if it isn't fancy. I worked part-time at the community library. Mark worked full-time at a manufacturing company. We weren't wealthy, but we were comfortable enough to follow the same weekly rhythms: grocery runs on Sundays, takeout on Fridays, and quiet evenings where he'd watch sports while I read on the couch. It wasn't exciting, but it was ours. Or at least, I thought it was. Looking back, the first thread began to loosen on the night of Mark's birthday in January. Not the big explosion, that came later, but the quiet unraveling. It was one of those Ohio evenings where the sky looks like concrete and the air feels like it's carrying ice. I remember cooking all day, because that's what I do when I want everything to feel okay. Roast chicken, mashed potatoes, green beans sautéed with garlic, and a chocolate cake cooling on the counter. I lit the lemon candle he liked. I wore the soft blue sweater he once said made my eyes look warm. For a few hours, it truly felt like a celebration. He laughed when he opened his gifts. He kissed my temple as he passed behind me in the kitchen. He made a joke about finally reaching the age where his back hurt from sleeping wrong. Everything felt normal, safe. And then the doorbell rang. My brother, Caleb, stood on the porch, bundled in a coat dusted with snow. We hadn't been close in years, but he carried this way of slipping into my life whenever he wanted something. Still, I let him in. I always did. Families are complicated like that, loyalty mixed with old guilt. He brought a bottle of wine as a birthday gift for Mark, but something about the way he smiled didn't sit right with me. It was too tight, too forced, as if he were holding back words he wasn't sure he should say yet. I brushed the feeling away. I didn't want anything to ruin the evening. But the truth is, the moment he walked through that door, the warmth in the house shifted. Mark stiffened just slightly. Caleb watched us with that calculating look he used to have as a kid when he was deciding how to get out of trouble by putting the blame on someone else. And there, in that tiny shift, that almost invisible tension, was the very first warning sign of the storm that would eventually tear my life apart. I didn't know it then, but that birthday dinner was the last peaceful night I would have for a very long time. Life before everything shattered wasn't perfect, but it was familiar. And sometimes familiarity feels so much like safety that you forget to question it. After Mark's birthday dinner, things settled into their usual winter rhythm, the kind where the cold outside makes the home feel warmer just by contrast. I slipped back into my routines, prepping lunches, folding laundry in the living room while a crime documentary played, calling my daughter in the evenings to talk about her college classes. It all felt steady. Mark and I had our habits carved into muscle memory after 27 years. He'd come home from work just after 5, kiss my cheek, kick off his boots on the mat, and sigh like the weight of the world had finally slid off his shoulders. I'd ask about his day. He'd give short answers but still smile at me like he was glad to see me. Sometimes he'd grab my hand on the couch and rub circles into my thumb while we watched TV. Simple things. Quiet reassurance. Those moments had always been enough for me. Even my part-time job at the library felt comforting. I loved shelving books, organizing returns, recommending novels to regulars. The building was old and drafty, but I liked the way the floors creaked under my shoes. The staff was small, 4 women including me, and they'd tease me gently about my obsession with keeping the mystery section alphabetized. It was a small life, but it was mine. Caleb, my brother, only showed up occasionally. He'd stop by unannounced with some excuse, needing help filling out paperwork, wanting advice about bills, asking if I could lend him just a little money until he got things sorted. He had a long history of mismanaging everything: relationships, jobs, finances. Growing up, I was always the one covering for him. Old habits die painfully slow. Mark tolerated him. Not warmly, not affectionately, but tolerating is its own form of peace sometimes. Mark used to say, "People show you who they are. Believe them." I always thought he meant that about strangers. I didn't realize he'd eventually apply it to me. Still, the days after the birthday dinner felt calm. If Caleb had brought tension with him, it faded by the next morning. Or at least, I thought it did. Mark was quieter but not cold. He watched me a little too long sometimes, like he was studying something in my face he couldn't quite name, but I chalked it up to tiredness. Winter weighed on him more each year. One evening, I found him in the garage staring at the workbench. Nothing was broken. Nothing needed fixing. He was just standing there with his hands braced on the wood, breathing slow and heavy. When I called his name, he startled, actually startled, like I'd pulled him out of some deep thought he didn't want to be in. He smiled quickly, said he was fine, asked if dinner was ready. But the moment carved a tiny hollow in my stomach that didn't go away. Looking back, that was the first real shift. Tiny, quiet, but real. A week later, Caleb called me late at night. He never called. He always texted. The minute his name lit up my phone, I felt a prickle across my skin. He didn't ask how I was or apologize for the late hour. He just said he needed something from me. His voice had that same forced cheer he used at the birthday dinner, like he was keeping some secret tucked behind his teeth. After the call, Mark asked who it was. When I said Caleb, something flickered across his face, quick, unreadable. He didn't comment, but his jaw tightened the faintest bit before he turned back to the TV. That should have been another warning sign. But when you love someone, you don't assume their silence is the start of a betrayal. You assume they are tired, or distracted, or maybe you assume nothing at all, because believing everything is fine feels easier than imagining the alternative. Life kept moving, snow kept falling, and I kept telling myself that families have complicated moments. That tension doesn't always mean trouble. That silence isn't always danger. But deep down, the house felt a little less warm. As if someone had cracked open a window somewhere and let the cold seep in without me noticing exactly where it came from. And soon, I would learn that the smallest cracks are the ones that split open the fastest. The real shift began on a Tuesday afternoon, the kind of ordinary day that shouldn't matter at all. I had just finished my shift at the library and was tidying the front desk when my coworker, Sandra, handed me my phone. I must have left it near the copier. She said, casually, "Your husband called twice." That alone wasn't unusual. Mark sometimes checked in if he knew I'd be driving home in bad weather, but something in her voice made me look at the screen immediately. 2 missed calls, 1 voicemail, and right under that, a text from Caleb. "Did you tell him?" My stomach dropped, though I didn't know why. There was nothing to tell. Nothing secret. Nothing strange. Nothing I could think of that would link my husband and my brother in any meaningful way. Still, my hand shook just slightly as I opened the voicemail. Mark's voice was clipped, tense in a way I hadn't heard in years. He asked me to call him back as soon as possible. No explanation. No warmth. Just urgency. I stepped outside into the biting wind, pressed his name, and waited. He picked up on the first ring. "Where are you?" he asked. "Still at work," I said. "What's wrong?" There was a long pause, too long, and then he said, "We'll talk when you get home." My heart began thudding, but I forced my voice to stay calm. "Can you at least tell me what this is about?" Another pause. Just come home, Rachel. He hung up. I stood on the sidewalk with the cold blowing into my coat and the sense that something invisible had shifted beneath my feet. I called Caleb next. I don't even know why, instinct maybe, and he answered with a bright, unnatural cheerfulness. Hey, sis, what did you mean by that text? I asked. Silence. A small, careful silence. Then he laughed, but it wasn't genuine. Nothing. Don't worry about it. Caleb, seriously, what's going on? Another silence. Then, I think I said too much. I'll, let you handle things. And he hung up. My whole drive home, my mind churned through possibilities, none of them making sense. When I walked through the front door, the house felt wrong. Not visibly, but in the air. Heavy. Still. Mark was sitting in his recliner, hands clasped, staring at the blank TV screen. He didn't look at me when I came in. I tried to joke lightly. You look like you're contemplating the universe. Nothing. I set down my bag. Mark, talk to me. He inhaled slowly through his nose, then turned his head toward me with a look I'd never seen before. Not anger exactly, but something colder. Something like disappointment sharpened into suspicion. I had a conversation today, he said. With your brother. That sentence alone was enough to make every nerve in my body tighten. Caleb rarely talked to Mark without me present, and when he did, it was always about needing help with something trivial. What did he say? I asked. Mark looked away, as if deciding how much truth to give me. He said you've been keeping things from me. My breath caught. What things? He didn't answer. I sat on the edge of the couch. Mark, I haven't. Don't. His voice cracked like a whip, quick and sharp enough to make me flinch. Not until I know the whole story. I stared at him, confused, hurt, and deeply unsettled. I don't know what story you think there is. He stood abruptly and walked past me toward the kitchen. The sound of his footsteps felt too loud in the small house. For the rest of the evening, he barely spoke. When he did, his answers were clipped and tinged with accusation I couldn't explain. That night, I lay awake beside him, staring at the ceiling while he faced the wall. I could feel the distance like a physical thing. He didn't reach for me. He didn't even breathe in the familiar, steady way he usually did. It felt like sleeping beside a stranger. And all I could think was, what did Caleb say? What lie had he planted? And why? Why would Mark believe him without even asking me? It was the first night I sensed something was coming, something big enough to crack open the life I'd worked so hard to keep steady. I just didn't know yet that the crack had already begun spreading. Over the next few days, the tension in our house grew so subtly that if I hadn't been watching Mark with the eyes of someone terrified of losing him, I might have missed it. He stopped asking about my day. He checked his phone more often. He avoided eye contact when I'd come into a room. It wasn't dramatic. It was quiet, slow, like frost forming overnight on a window. You don't see it happen, but suddenly everything looks blurred and cold. By Friday, I couldn't take it anymore. We were eating dinner, or rather, I was eating and Mark was pushing his food around the plate, when I finally said, "You need to tell me what my brother said." He didn't look up. I'm still trying to decide if I believe it. Believe what? My voice cracked with frustration. He sighed, set his fork down, and leaned back like he was preparing himself for impact. Then he said, in a tone so flat it barely sounded like him, "Caleb told me you've been taking money from our joint account. Large amounts." I stared at him, stunned. What? I haven't taken a dime. He said you were helping him pay off some debt he didn't want me to know about. I shook my head immediately. Mark, that's not true. You know I wouldn't hide something like that. He finally looked at me, but the look wasn't one of recognition. It was like he was studying a stranger. Do I? The words cut deeper than the accusation itself. I opened the banking app right there at the table and shoved the screen toward him. Look at the transactions. I haven't withdrawn anything except grocery money. He hesitated before taking the phone, like he was afraid to be proven wrong. He scrolled slowly. I watched his eyes flick across the screen, watched confusion flicker into doubt. For a moment, I thought the nightmare might end there. But then he said, "Caleb told me you were smart enough to hide it another way." My jaw dropped. So he lies, and you believe him. I show you proof, and you still believe him. Mark stood abruptly, chair scraping the floor, and walked out of the dining room without a word. That night, he slept on the couch. And that was when I knew this wasn't just about money. Caleb had planted something darker, something poisonous, and it had taken root. The next morning, I found Mark in the garage again, staring at the workbench the same way he had before all this started. Except this time, he wasn't just thinking. He was trembling. "Mark," I said softly, "please tell me what's really going on." He didn't look at me as he said, "Caleb told me you planned to leave me." My whole body went cold. Why would he say that? He said you told him you were unhappy, that you wanted space, freedom. Mark swallowed hard. He said you've been thinking about it for months. My first thought was denial. My second thought was anger. My third was a sudden, overwhelming sadness because the man I loved wasn't asking if it was true. He wasn't searching my face for reassurance. He wasn't reaching for me. He was believing it. "Mark," I whispered, "I never said any of that. I never even thought it." He finally met my eyes, and I saw something broken there. Something already convinced. He said he found messages, Mark added quietly, "on your phone." Messages? My heart pounded so hard my vision blurred. What messages? Mark shook his head. "I don't know. He said he deleted them before I saw them. But he said they were explicit and not meant for me." My knees buckled, and I grabbed the edge of the workbench. "Mark, that's impossible. Caleb is lying. He's done this before, twisting things, manipulating." "I know Caleb has faults," Mark snapped, "but he said he was trying to protect me." "Protect you from what?" I cried. "From your own wife." He didn't answer. Instead, he walked past me like I wasn't even there. That afternoon, he locked himself in the bedroom. When he finally emerged hours later, his face was hard, cold, resolved in a way that made my stomach twist. And that's when I realized something irreversible had happened. Something had snapped inside him, and whatever came next, I wasn't sure I'd recognize the man delivering it. I just didn't know yet how far it would go, or how much I would lose before the truth surfaced. Everything reached its breaking point the following week. Mark had become a ghost in our home, silent, watchful, filled with a quiet resentment that seeped into the walls like smoke, and I felt like I was suffocating in it. Every time I tried to speak, he shut me down with a look. Every time I reached for him, he stepped back. I'd wake up and see him staring at the ceiling, his jaw clenched, as if he were rehearsing arguments I'd never get to hear. I kept telling myself that if I could just explain, if he would just listen, we could untangle whatever lies Caleb had spun. But there comes a moment when you realize explanation isn't enough. When the person you love has chosen a story about you instead of the truth from your mouth. And that realization felt like a cold, thin blade slipping under my skin. It happened on a Wednesday morning. I poured Mark a cup of coffee, just like always. I set it on the counter beside him. He didn't touch it, didn't look at me, didn't even blink. I said quietly, "Mark, please, this isn't us." He said, "I don't know who us is anymore." Those words settled into my chest like stones. That's when something inside me shifted. Not dramatically, not with anger or shouting, but quietly, steadily, like a line being drawn. I knew then that I couldn't keep begging him to see me. I had to see myself, and I had to start figuring out what Caleb had really done. That afternoon, while Mark was at work, I sat at our kitchen table with a notepad and began piecing together everything. Every conversation, every change in Mark's behavior, every strange detail since the birthday dinner. It was like looking at a puzzle that had been shoved into my hands without a picture to guide me. I wrote down 3 possibilities. Caleb lied to get money, not unusual. Caleb wanted something from Mark, but what? Caleb wanted to ruin my marriage, the most painful possibility, and the one I feared was true. I didn't know his motive, but I knew his patterns. Caleb had always carried this simmering resentment toward me, the sister who became responsible, the one who started a stable life while he drowned himself in bad decisions. He'd borrowed money from me for years, and every time I finally said no, he punished me in some subtle, manipulative way. He wasn't just lying. He was dismantling me. And Mark, my steady, dependable Mark, had walked right into the trap. It hurt. God, it hurt. But pain has a way of sharpening things. For the first time, instead of crying or pleading, I felt something else rise inside me, not anger yet, but clarity. A cool, deliberate calm. If I didn't take back control of my life, someone else would continue writing the narrative for me. So I started planning. Not revenge, not yet. Just truth. Real truth. I decided to gather proof. To trace every step of Caleb's story until I could show Mark undeniable evidence of the lies. I went through bank statements, pulled up text logs, checked every device we owned. Nothing on my phone matched Caleb's claims. Of course it didn't. But I took screenshots anyway, organized them into folders like I was preparing for a court case. Then I did something I hadn't done in months. I reached out to my daughter. Not to worry her, just to ask how school was going. Hearing her voice steadied me. It reminded me I was still someone's mother, someone's home, someone who mattered outside of this storm. That evening, I made dinner. Mark didn't come home until late. When he walked in, he barely nodded at me. But instead of shrinking, I simply observed him, his exhausted posture, his tight shoulders, the way he wouldn't look at me. This wasn't a man who hated me. This was a man who had been poisoned. And poison, I told myself, can be drawn out. That night, as he slept on the far edge of the bed, I lay awake with a strange calm settling over me. I wasn't powerless. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't what Caleb said I was. I would find the truth. I would put it in Mark's hands. I would reclaim my name, my marriage, or, if it came to it, my freedom. One way or another, this was the moment the tide turned. The breaking point came on a night so bitterly cold the air outside felt like glass. Mark had been distant for days, but that evening he walked through the door with a different energy. Tight, explosive, barely contained. I could tell immediately something had shifted again, and not in my favor. He didn't take off his coat, didn't greet me, didn't look at the dinner I had kept warm in the oven. He just stood in the doorway, breathing hard, fists clenched. "Ma," I asked softly, "what happened?" He didn't answer. Instead, he tossed something onto the coffee table, a stack of printed pages. I recognized them instantly, our bank statements. But this time, there were withdrawals on them that I'd never seen. Large ones. Thousands. My stomach dropped. "They weren't there yesterday," I whispered. "I know," he said, voice low and shaking. "Caleb showed me where you hid the old ones." I shook my head. "Those aren't mine. Someone altered something." "Stop lying." The shout cracked through the house. I froze. Mark had never raised his voice like that before. Not once in 27 years. He stepped closer, eyes burning with a fury that didn't belong to him. "You gave him money. You betrayed me. You planned to leave. You." "I didn't." I cried. "Mark, listen to me." And then everything erupted. He shoved the coffee table aside so hard it slammed into the wall. He grabbed my arm, fingers digging into my skin. His face was inches from mine, twisted with pain and rage and confusion, all of it aimed at me. "You made me look like a fool," he hissed. "You let him use me. You lied." "I didn't," I whispered again, but my voice cracked. That's when he hit me. A single strike across the face, open-handed but brutal. The world spun. Pain flashed through my skull. I stumbled back, grabbing the side of the couch to steady myself. My lips split. I tasted iron. He didn't apologize. He didn't even flinch. Instead, he pointed at the door. "Get out." I stayed at him. "Mark, it's below freezing." "Get out." His voice was final, absolute. A stranger's voice in my husband's body. I shook, trying to think, trying to breathe, trying to understand how everything had disintegrated so quickly. But he grabbed my coat and threw it at me, then changed his mind, yanked it back, and hurled it into the corner like I didn't deserve it. Barefoot, no coat, lip bleeding, heart shattering, he dragged me toward the door, opened it, and pushed me outside so hard I stumbled onto the icy porch. The wind knifed through my sweater instantly. Snow stung my skin. The cold bit into my feet like fire. Behind me, Mark's silhouette filled the doorway, tall, trembling, broken in ways I couldn't yet understand. "Don't come back," he said. The door slammed, and the lock clicked. For a moment, I stood there frozen, breath shaking, mind blank. The world was silent except for the distant hum of a passing car and the crunch of snow beneath my toes as I tried to shift my weight. Then something inside me snapped into focus. This wasn't just Caleb's lie anymore. This wasn't just Mark choosing the wrong person to trust. This was violence. This was betrayal. This was the moment everything old died. I stepped off the porch, each footfall burning with cold, and walked down the driveway with tears freezing on my cheeks. I didn't know where I was going, just somewhere away from the house that had stopped being home. At the end of the street, I turned and looked back at the windows glowing warm in the darkness, the house we'd built our life inside. And for the first time, I didn't ache to be let back in. I just wanted the truth, and I wanted justice. The cold couldn't numb that. Nothing could. Mark thought he'd thrown me out to end things. But really, he'd just given me the ending, and the fire. I needed to expose everything. The night Mark threw me out, I walked through the cold until my legs numbed and my breath came in sharp clouds. I didn't cry the way people imagine. Loud, shaking, dramatic. No, my tears were quiet, sliding down my face only to freeze at my jawline. It wasn't until I reached the small gas station 3 blocks away that warmth finally hit my skin and the shock began to ease enough for thought to return. The clerk, a young girl who recognized me from the library, rushed over the moment she saw my bare feet and bleeding lip. She wrapped me in her coat and called an ambulance despite my protests. In hindsight, I'm grateful she didn't listen. Shock makes fools of the strongest people. The paramedics checked me, asked questions, and gently suggested I go somewhere safe. I said I'd call my daughter, but instead, I called someone else, my friend Karen, the one person in town who wouldn't sugarcoat the truth. She arrived within 15 minutes, furious on my behalf before she even heard the full story. She brought me to her house, sat me on the couch, made tea, wrapped me in blankets, and said softly, "Whenever you're ready." And for the first time, I told someone everything. Every lie Caleb had planted, every change in Mark's behavior, every accusation, every moment that led to that strike across my face. By the end, Karen's expression wasn't sympathy, it was resolve. "Rachel," she said, "you need to protect yourself. Starting now." I nodded, trembling. I wasn't thinking about revenge anymore. Not about saving my marriage. Not even about confronting Mark. I was thinking about survival, about rebuilding, about reclaiming the pieces of myself scattered across the last month. Karen helped me photograph the bruises. She helped me document everything I remembered. She urged me to stay with her as long as I needed. I slept in her guest room that night, wrapped in thick blankets that smelled like lavender detergent, and for the first time in weeks, I slept without fear. The next morning, I did something that felt both terrifying and liberating. I called a lawyer. Her name was Melissa, and her voice was calm, measured, professional. She didn't react dramatically when I told her what happened. She simply said, "You've taken the hardest step by calling. Now let's gather everything." We went through every detail. She asked careful questions. She helped me pull old bank statements. She taught me how to request Mark's account history directly from the bank. She pointed out inconsistencies, withdrawals that didn't match my habits, transfers that led to accounts I didn't recognize. Bit by bit, the puzzle formed a picture. And it wasn't me. It wasn't anything I had done. It was Caleb. He had accessed our computer. He had installed a temporary app that allowed file edits. He had manipulated statements. He had planted messages he likely sent to my phone while pretending to borrow it weeks before. every thread traced back to him, and Mark had swallowed it whole. The bank confirmed unauthorized access. The timestamps didn't match my login history. Melissa's eyes sharpened when she saw the evidence. "This isn't just manipulation," she said. "This is fraud." Hearing that word steadied something in me. Fraud. A crime. Something real, traceable, provable. The truth was no longer a ghost hovering at the edge of belief. It was concrete. But here's the part that surprised me. As the days passed, as the truth formed itself into a solid structure I could stand on, I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel vindicated. I felt tired, deeply, bone-level tired. Like I'd been carrying a weight for years rather than weeks. Karen cooked for me. Melissa guided me. My daughter cried when she finally learned what happened and begged me to stay with her for a while. And slowly, the world began to widen again. Not warm yet, but open. I wasn't ready to confront Mark. Not yet. Not with anger. Not with fury. But with calm truth. With evidence. With the person I had become through all this, steadier, clearer, unbroken. And I knew this. When the moment came to face him, he wouldn't just see the truth of what Caleb did. He would see what he'd done to me. And he would never be able to take it back. I confronted Mark 3 weeks after he threw me out. By then, the bruises had faded, the shock had settled into something steadier, and the truth, the real truth, was organized into neat folders inside Melissa's briefcase. I wasn't walking into that house to beg, or plead, or explain. I was walking in as someone who had finally stopped shrinking herself to fit someone else's fear. When he opened the door, he froze. He looked thinner, older somehow, as if the anger he'd clung to had carved him out from the inside. For a long moment, he didn't speak. He just stared at my face, not at my lip or the healed bruise, but at my eyes. Maybe searching for the wife he'd lost, or the woman he'd chosen not to believe. "I need to talk," I said. My voice was calm, steady, and he stepped aside. The house felt smaller than I remembered, colder, like closing the door had sealed in all the mistakes neither of us could undo. He stood there, leaning on the back of the recliner, waiting for me to explain myself like I'd come to earn forgiveness. But I didn't explain. I presented. I laid out the bank documents, the timestamps, the digital access logs, the fake messages Caleb had planted, the withdrawals traced back to accounts he controlled, every lie, every manipulation, every piece of proof that I had done nothing wrong. Mark read silently at first. Then his breathing changed, heavier, uneven. He sank into the recliner like his legs had given out, and for the first time since this nightmare began, I saw clarity move across his face. Horror, regret, recognition. "Rachel, oh God." His voice broke. What did I do? I didn't answer right away. I wanted him to sit in that moment, not to punish him, but to let the truth settle where it needed to settle. He had believed the wrong person. He had chosen suspicion over trust. He had let another man twist his view of me until he no longer saw the woman he'd lived beside for nearly 30 years. And worst of all, he had laid his hands on me. "I didn't leave because of Caleb," I finally said. "I left because you hurt me. And because you chose to believe a lie without even giving me the dignity of a conversation." He looked up at me with eyes full of devastation. I thought I was protecting myself. "You destroyed us," I said softly. Not angry, not dramatic, just the truth. He broke down then, shoulders shaking, breath shuddering, hands covering his face. It was painful to watch, not because I still loved him in the same way, but because grief is never clean. You don't stop caring about someone just because they broke you. The care just changes shape, turns quieter, duller, sadder. When he finally spoke again, his voice was barely above a whisper. "Can you forgive me?" I took a slow breath. The question sat between us like a fragile glass object neither of us wanted to touch. "I can heal," I said. "But forgiveness is something you earn with actions, not apologies." He nodded, defeated, but with something new in his expression, accountability. And maybe that was enough for the moment. Not to fix things, not to rebuild the marriage, but to close the wound with honesty instead of denial. We didn't get back together. I stayed with Karen for a while, then eventually moved into a small apartment near my daughter. Mark sought therapy, admitted his mistakes, and cut contact with Caleb permanently. And Caleb, well, the legal consequences found him, just like Melissa said they would. As for me, I rebuilt my life slowly, quietly, on my own terms. I found strength in places I'd never looked before, in my voice, in my independence, in the way I learned to trust myself again after nearly losing everything. And that, I think, is the real ending. Not the pain, not the betrayal, but the aftermath, the part where I realized I had survived something meant to break me, and I came out clearer, wiser, and unapologetically whole. Did you like my story? Please like and subscribe, and tell me in the comments where you're listening from. I want to know how far this story of mine travels. Sometimes the deepest wounds teach us the strength we didn't know we carried, and the courage to never let anyone rewrite our truth again.